Right, finally, let's talk about the teenage footballer who was banned from 6 matches because she described a male player as a man. So this is a autistic girl. She was 17 at the time. She noticed that a transgender woman was on the other side on a team called Manchester Laces, which prides itself as an inclusive football team. She says to the transgender player, "Are you a man?" Then she goes to the referee and raises her concerns about the fact that, there's a male on the pitch. This is dangerous. We know that lots of injuries have been caused by this kind of thing. And she's slapped with a 6-match ban. The FA has since had to change its policy after the Supreme Court ruling that says that, we shouldn't have trans women on women's teams. But they haven't apologised to her. They haven't, rescinded. They haven't said that, actually, yes, you're in the right. But it's pretty shocking, isn't it? You just state a statement of truth to get you banned from...
No, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things that just because football isn't, typically a sort of, it's not rugby or it's not boxing, doesn't mean that there's not a clear threat when you've got someone, who's had the benefits of male puberty going into a flying slide tackle or something like this. It's so obvious to anyone with even a modicum of common sense. The fact that the FA were continuing down this route and punishing people just for pointing this out. I have to say, the interview that she gave, I thought was the most striking thing, just because of how you get the sense that people are much more confidently pushing back against these things now. I think she was asked, do you feel any regret or do you feel sorry for that trans player who now is no longer able to compete? She said no. Yeah. And it was completely within her rights to do so. It was, if anything, the question should have been asked in the other direction. Like, why do you think it's acceptable to, just for the sake of your own self-image, eat away at women's sport and actually put these young women in danger at the same time? But, I think one thing that's, it was obviously positive that the FA have changed their policy, but I think one thing going forward that will be really clear is that there's, even with the Supreme Court ruling, there's a battle to be had within all of these different institutions. They're going to try and cling on. At the moment, there's this kind of idea we need to wait for the proper guidance to come out. There's a lot of kind of stalling that's taking place. But it's like we were saying about in relation to the police and other things, like this thing is really bedded in, not because people have thought about it, just because they, are more concerned about being called names rather than actually upholding fair sport and so on. But it was a nice example of just how much more confidence people now have, I think, in pushing back against this.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, like, every interview I've seen on the BBC where they've, talked about the issue of women's sports, particularly since that ruling, has focused on how sad it is for men not to be allowed to...
The real victims.
The real victims. And, they're not allowed to play in the sport they love. Well, they are allowed to play. They're just playing in the wrong category.
Well, but this is the thing. The people that claim to be so inclusive are not in favour of trans-only sporting leagues or sporting categories. Their view of inclusivity is to shoehorn male athletes into female sport, which is absolutely baffling. Every time I say, hey, trans people should be included, they should have their own league, people are like, no, that's impractical. But what you're really saying is you're just using them as sort of a political pawn. It's the same thing as sort of shelters for like trans individuals. When I said this, like Orange was like, no, there's not enough trans people. I'm like, but surely the concern should be they're like scared for their lives. They should have a safe space for them while not infringing upon women who have been, victims of domestic violence. But no, that's not it. We need to hear from men about how other men who feel like they're not men should be shoehorned into women's spaces. Or the thing that annoys me the most, we need to have a conversation about it, as if we are all deaf and we lack basic knowledge to observe one of the most obvious realities of biology and human life, which is that there are two sexes and they're not interchangeable. On female sport, actually, as particularly football, I have a unique gripe because I've been trying to campaign to have the pitches made smaller. I don't know if you've ever watched women's football.
Yeah.
It's terrible. And it's terrible because... No, let me tell you.
You said it, not us.
Hold on, let me tell you why it's not terrible because the female athletes are bad. So they actually did a study where they showed two football players, a man and a woman, but they from the neck down, so you couldn't actually tell the gender difference. Yeah. It's kind of like racing. They're actually extremely good athletes. Just even get to that level, they're very good, and the quality of the football is just as good as each other. So there's this is not idea that the women can't play football, but the problem is because you have women play on pitches that are designed for men. Their shots don't go as far. It slows down the game. They look like toddlers in the goalpost because their arm width, sort of the width from the both points of the arms, is not long enough. But when you say this, it kind of seems like, oh, you're just dumbing down women's sport or you're trying to remove the legitimacy of women's football. There is literally no other sport where men and women play, like tennis, for example, where the sport isn't accommodated for the woman's figure. Because it's not just about recognizing that men and women are different. You also have to accommodate them.
Yeah.
Not just because you want the enjoyment of the sport and the sport to go far and to do well and to get more bums on seats so that women don't whinge about unequal payment, unfair payment or whatever. But because you actually believe in that sport. But they don't do that. You speak to any of them and they're like, oh no, you just let them play on the same pitches as men. Oh, is that because you don't want to put money behind actually getting women, female football pitches? It's incredible. It's like asking me to play tennis on on ice.
Mm. Well, I think we have learned how little people care about women's sports.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
it has
exactly.
been quite eye-opening, especially, among the sort of celebrity set who claim to be so inclusive.
Yeah.
I mean, Gary Lineker, for instance, was did an interview with the Telegraph this week where he basically just said it's a non-issue, which is obviously nonsense.
And it is funny as well because, Gary Lineker aside, there's a certain type of commentator who are constantly, when the women won the Euros and so on, they were like, we really need to support women's football, even though, they probably never watched another game after that.
They don't actually care about it. Because
Exactly.
what makes football so valuable, such a high value industry, and all getting people to pay hundreds of pounds for football tickets is because it's entertaining to watch. It is not entertaining when you're asking people to watch a slowed down version of what they enjoy. Like you have to put the spectator in mind. And this is actually good for women's football as well. If you actually got people watching and saying, actually, there's not really much difference between the male and female sport, they're going just as fast because you've accommodated the pitch to the athlete or the setting or the environment to the athlete, that makes a lot more sense than just saying, oh yeah, support women's football. No.
And as you say, it's standard practice, tennis, fewer sets and
Exactly.
so on. This is obvious,
There's literally no other
to
sport where men and women actually do the same activity where it's not accommodated for women in the same way that it's accommodated for men. It's just female football. And guess what? It's because the Football Federation are cheap and they don't want to invest.
And it's so funny that at the same time they're like, it's a high point for women's football, we should invest in it. Also, we should allow men to play in it, maybe.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Those two things are happening at the same time.
And since no one has taken the open goal, let's say that in women's football, there should be one ball on the pitch.
You've been sitting on that, so to speak.
And no Adam's apples. None. Zero. I don't want to see any Adam's apples. I don't want to see anything dangling between the legs.
Yeah.
None of it.
Great.